The assassination attempt. The opulent courtyard of the Vortan royal palace glittered under the light of 1,000 artificial stars, the grand ceremonial event in full swing. Nobles, dignitaries, and military leaders from across the galaxy had gathered to witness the ascension of Princess Taurus, heir to the Vortan throne. The air buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the hum of ceremonial music. Princess Taurus, resplendent in her ornate gown, moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never known fear or failure. Her silver robes, embroidered with the symbols of Vortan nobility, shimmered as she glided across the polished stone floor. Her every movement exuded authority and grace, the very embodiment of Vortan supremacy. As she approached the dais to deliver her speech, her gaze swept across the sea of faces, seeing only adoration and reverence reflected back at her. For Taurus, this moment was the culmination of years of preparation, the first step in her eventual rise to power. Her voice, cold and commanding, echoed across the courtyard as she began to speak of the Vortan Empire's glory, its strength, and the future she would lead them into. But as her words resonated through the crowd, a shadow moved at the edge of the grand hall, a figure slipping unnoticed among the throng. Terry Griffin, a human soldier assigned to the Vortan delegation, was not supposed to be here. His official role was minor, a guard assigned to ensure the safety of a few human diplomats during the ceremony. Yet something in the atmosphere felt wrong. His instincts, honed by years of combat and survival in the harshest conditions, screamed at him that danger was imminent. His eyes scanned the crowd, the elegant robes and flowing garments of the Vortan elite hiding the true intentions of those present. He had no love for the Vortans, their arrogance and condescension towards humans grating on him daily, but his duty was clear. If there was a threat, he had to neutralize it. His senses heightened. Terry moved subtly through the crowd, his gaze narrowing as he caught sight of an unfamiliar figure slipping through the shadows, moving with a purpose that belied the casual demeanor of the guests. The figure, cloaked in a dark, nondescript robe, was heading straight for the dais where Princess Taurus stood, oblivious to the approaching danger. Suddenly, everything happened in a blur. The assassin, swift and silent, raised a weapon Terry recognized all too well, a plasma pistol, sleek and deadly, capable of vaporizing a target in seconds. Without thinking, Terry lunged forward, shoving through the crowd as the assassin took aim. The blast of searing plasma cut through the air, aimed squarely at Princess Taurus's heart. There was no time for hesitation. Terry moved with a speed that belied his human limitations, his military training kicking in as he tackled the princess to the ground, shielding her with his body. The plasma bolt struck him instead, the energy slamming into his armored back with a force that nearly knocked him unconscious. Pain exploded through his body, but Terry gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay conscious. The sound of the blast was deafening, the crowd erupting into chaos as nobles screamed and scattered in all directions, guards rushing to contain the situation. Princess Taurus, stunned and disoriented, found herself on the ground, her pristine gown smeared with dirt and ash, the smell of burnt fabric filling her nostrils. She had never been touched so roughly in her life, let alone by a human, and the shock of it left her momentarily speechless. But as her vision cleared and she saw the figure of her assailant fleeing through the panicked crowd, her indignation flared. How dare this lowly human manhandle her, a princess of the Vortan Empire? Her revulsion was palpable as she glared at Terry, who, despite the pain, was already on his feet, scanning the courtyard for further threats. But there was no time for royal tantrums. Terry's combat instincts screamed at him that this was no random attack. Someone wanted Taurus dead, and they had inside help. The palace was compromised, and staying here would only invite more danger. Ignoring the princess's protests and demands, Terry grabbed her by the arm, pulling her into a hidden maintenance corridor he had memorized during his earlier patrols. Taurus stumbled after him, cursing his name with every step, her fury barely contained. She couldn't fathom why she had to endure this indignity. Being manhandled by a primitive species she considered beneath contempt was the ultimate insult. But Terry paid her no mind, his focus solely on getting her to safety. His mind raced as he calculated the odds, knowing that if the assassin had inside help, they could be surrounded by enemies at any moment. His priority was clear: get the princess out of the palace and off-planet as quickly as possible. Minutes later, they reached a small, hidden hangar deep within the palace grounds. The sleek human spacecraft Terry had commandeered roared to life as they blasted away from Vortan Prime, leaving behind the chaos and confusion of the attempted assassination. Only then did the full weight of the situation hit Terry. As a soldier in the human delegation, his mission had been to forge an alliance with the Vortan Empire, an alliance humanity desperately needed to gain access to Vortan's advanced terraforming technology vital for colonizing new worlds and ensuring humanity's survival. But now, rocketing through space with a furious princess and unknown enemies on their tail, Terry realized this assassination attempt could shatter the fragile relationship between their peoples. Everything he had worked for, every hard-won concession from the Vortan diplomats, hung in the balance. For Princess Taurus, the situation was no less dire. Her world, one of absolute control and power, had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. She had been raised to believe in the supremacy of her race, in the invulnerability of her position as the Vortan heir. Now, she was being dragged through space by a human, a species she had always considered inferior, on the run from assassins within her own court. Her pride stung, and her anger at the indignity she was suffering was almost overwhelming. But beneath the anger was a growing fear, a realization that for the first time in her life, she was not in control. Someone wanted her dead, and she didn't know who to trust. As they hurtled through space, the silence between them was heavy with tension. Terry, his mind racing, tried to focus on the task at hand. He needed to figure out who was behind the assassination attempt and why they wanted Taurus dead. If he could uncover the conspiracy and protect the princess, he might still be able to salvage the alliance. But the odds were stacked against him. They had no allies, no safe haven to run to, and their enemies could be anywhere. The weight of responsibility bore down on him, the fate of two species resting on his shoulders. Failure was not an option. He had to unravel this conspiracy, keep the ungrateful princess safe, and somehow, against all odds, bring her back to Vortan Prime alive. As the ship sped towards the nearest human outpost, Terry allowed himself a brief moment to assess his situation. The princess, though furious, was unharmed, and for now they were safe. But he knew this was only the beginning. Whoever had orchestrated the attack was still out there, and they would not stop until Taurus was dead. He had to be ready for anything. He had to be prepared to fight, to protect, and to do whatever it took to keep her alive. Because in this moment, the future of humanity depended on it. The unlikely alliance. The human outpost on the edge of Vortan space was a far cry from the grandiosity of the Vortan royal palace. A rugged utilitarian structure built for functionality rather than aesthetics, it stood in stark contrast to the opulent halls Taurus was accustomed to. As their ship approached the hangar bay, Terry could see the faint glow of the base's energy shields shimmering against the backdrop of space. The base itself was small, a mere speck in the vastness of the cosmos, but it represented the last bastion of human presence before the uncharted territories beyond. The landing was smooth, the ship's thrusters flaring briefly as they touched down on the reinforced platform. Terry exhaled slowly, the tension in his muscles easing slightly now that they had a momentary reprieve from the chaos they had just escaped. As the ramp descended, revealing the stark interior of the hangar, Terry's mind was already racing ahead. He knew that the outpost, while safe for now, would not be secure for long. The Vortan forces, once they realized the princess was missing, would undoubtedly mount a search, and it was only a matter of time before they traced her to this location. But more immediate than that was the threat from within. The conspiracy that had already proven itself capable of infiltrating the highest echelons of Vortan society. If they had agents within the palace, there was no reason. Princess Taurus, her expression one of thinly veiled contempt, stepped out onto the platform, her gaze sweeping over the facility with a mixture of disdain and discomfort. She had never set foot on a human military installation before, and the stark utilitarian nature of the outpost was a jarring departure from the opulent luxury she was used to. Everything about the place felt foreign, alien in its simplicity, and it only served to heighten her sense of being out of place. Her gown, once a symbol of her status and power, now felt cumbersome and out of place among the utilitarian uniforms of the human soldiers who quickly surrounded them. Admiral Zerker, the commanding officer of the outpost, emerged from the command center, his weathered face a mask of concern as he took in the scene before him. The admiral was a veteran of numerous skirmishes along the Vortan border, and his sharp eyes immediately assessed the situation. Terry wasted no time in briefing him on the events that had transpired. His words clipped and efficient as he relayed the details of the assassination attempt, the escape, and the implications of a possible conspiracy within the Vortan hierarchy. As Terry spoke, Zerker's expression grew more grave, the lines on his face deepening with each revelation. "This is a delicate situation," Zerker said finally, his voice low and measured. "Providing sanctuary to the princess could be seen as an act of aggression by the Vortan Empire, especially if they believe she was taken against her will. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the threat to her life. If there is indeed a conspiracy within the Vortan leadership, it could have catastrophic consequences for our alliance." Taurus bristled at the implication that she needed human protection, her eyes flashing with indignation. "I will not be held prisoner by primitives," she snapped, her voice laced with disdain. "I demand to speak with my father at once. He will put an end to this nonsense." Terry shook his head, his expression firm. "That's inadvisable, Your Highness. Any communication could be traced, putting you at further risk. Until we know who we can trust, it's safer to remain here." The princess glared at him, her pride stung by the suggestion that she was anything less than invincible. She had always been in control, always the one to command and direct others. The idea that she was now at the mercy of a human soldier, relying on him for her safety, was almost more than she could bear. But as much as she loathed to admit it, she knew Terry was right. The threat was real, and until they could identify the traitors within her court, she would have to swallow her pride and accept his protection. The days that followed were tense and uncomfortable for both parties. The outpost, though secure, was far from the luxurious surroundings Taurus was used to, and she made no secret of her disdain for the Spartan accommodations. Her every word dripped with scorn, her every demand a reminder of her status as Vortan royalty. The human soldiers, used to the discipline and camaraderie of military life, found her haughty demeanor grating, but they followed Terry's lead in maintaining a professional distance, doing their best to accommodate her demands without compromising security. Terry, tasked with her protection, bore the brunt of her ire. Every interaction with the princess was a battle of wills, her sharp tongue constantly testing his patience. Yet, despite the constant friction, a grudging respect began to grow between them. Terry, despite his annoyance with her attitude, could not deny the strength of will that burned beneath Taurus's imperious exterior. She was intelligent, quick-witted, and fiercely determined, qualities that he had come to admire in his fellow soldiers. And for all her bluster, there was a vulnerability in her that he recognized, an uncertainty about the world she now found herself in, far removed from the life of privilege she had always known. Taurus, for her part, found herself reluctantly impressed by Terry's dedication. Despite her initial disdain for his species, she could not ignore the tireless effort he put into uncovering the conspiracy. He worked long hours, often foregoing sleep, as he pored over intelligence reports, consulted with his superiors, and coordinated with his contacts within the Vortan Empire. His loyalty to his mission, to protecting her and ensuring the success of the alliance, was unwavering. It was a quality she had not expected to find in a human, and it forced her to reconsider her previously held beliefs about their inferiority. The tension between them came to a head one evening, after a particularly heated argument over the next steps in their investigation. Taurus had demanded to be returned to Vortan Prime, insisting that she could handle the situation herself. Terry, ever the pragmatist, had refused, pointing out the dangers and the likelihood that any return would be a death sentence. The argument escalated quickly, their voices echoing through the corridors of the outpost as they clashed over strategy and responsibility. "Do you honestly believe you can just walk back into the palace and everything will be fine?" Terry had snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You were nearly killed by your own people, and you think they'll just welcome you back with open arms?" Taurus's eyes blazed with fury. "I am the princess of the Vortan Empire. I will not be caged here like some helpless child while you play at being my protector. And what good will that title do you if you're dead?" Terry retorted, his voice hard. "You may be a princess, but right now, you're also a target. The only way we're going to get through this is if we work together." The words hung in the air between them, the tension crackling like a live wire. For a moment, Taurus said nothing, her chest heaving with anger and frustration. But as she looked into Terry's eyes, she saw something that gave her pause, an intensity, a conviction that she had not seen in anyone before. He wasn't just saying these things to assert his authority, he genuinely believed that this was the only way to protect her, to save the Alliance. Slowly, the anger drained from her, replaced by a grudging realization. She was used to commanding, to giving orders and having them followed without question. But this was different. This was someone who wasn't afraid to challenge her, to push back when he thought she was wrong. And for the first time, she found herself considering the possibility that he might be right. "Very well," she said at last, her voice quieter, more measured. "We will do this your way. But understand this, Terry Griffin, I will not tolerate failure." Terry nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Neither will I, Your Highness." With that, the beginnings of an alliance were forged, one built not on mutual admiration or respect, but on necessity and a shared goal. They were an unlikely pair, a human soldier and an alien princess, bound together by circumstance and the looming threat of a conspiracy that could destroy everything they held dear. But as they turned their attention back to the task at hand, both knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger. They would have to rely on each other, trust in each other's strengths, if they were to survive and protect the fragile alliance that was the only hope for peace between their peoples. It was a beginning, albeit a tenuous one. But in the darkness of the unknown, it was enough to light the way forward, unraveling the conspiracy. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tense preparations and covert operations, each step bringing Terry and Princess Taurus closer to unraveling the tangled web of conspiracy that threatened both their worlds. The atmosphere at the human outpost remained charged, a powder keg of conflicting emotions and clashing cultures. Despite the growing camaraderie between Terry and Taurus, the unease among the human soldiers was palpable. They were well aware of the delicate nature of the situation. A single misstep could spark an interstellar incident, or worse, a full-scale war between humanity and the Vortan Empire. Terry spent every waking hour analyzing intelligence reports, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at a deeper, more sinister plot. The assassination attempt on Taurus was no isolated act of violence. It was the opening salvo in a carefully orchestrated plan to destabilize the Vortan leadership and drive a wedge between the Empire and its human allies. The evidence pointed to Prince Malachi, Taurus's own brother, as the mastermind behind the scheme, a revelation that sent shockwaves through both the human and Vortan camps. Taurus had taken the news with a cold, almost detached calm, her face a mask of regal composure. But Terry could see the cracks forming beneath the surface, the subtle tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes. The betrayal by her own blood cut deep, and for all her outward strength, there was a vulnerability there that she could not entirely hide. Malachi's actions were not just a personal affront, they were an existential threat to the very fabric of the Vortan Empire, and by extension, the fragile peace that had been forged between their two species. The breakthrough came when Admiral Zerker's team uncovered a series of encrypted communications between Malachi's forces and a shadowy network of operatives embedded within the Vortan military. The messages were fragmented, laden with code words and cryptic references. But the intent was clear. Malachi was building a coalition of Vortan supremacists, those who viewed humanity as a threat to their cultural purity and saw the alliance as a betrayal of Vortan's sovereignty. Their plan was to stage a coup, overthrowing the Emperor and severing all ties with Earth, a move that would almost certainly lead to war. Terry and Taurus pored over the data, their eyes scanning lines of code and tactical reports that painted a bleak picture of the challenges ahead. The outpost's command center became their war room, a place where they strategized and debated the best course of action. Every decision was fraught with risk, every potential move a gamble that could either save millions of lives or doom them to destruction. Terry admired Taurus's ability to think strategically, to weigh options with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned military leader. It was a side of her he had not seen before, and it deepened his respect for her, even as it heightened his awareness of the stakes. One evening, as the outpost lay shrouded in the darkness of space, Terry and Taurus found themselves alone in the command center, the quiet hum of the machinery the only sound breaking the silence. They had been working late into the night, their faces lit by the dim glow of the holoscreens as they sifted through the latest intelligence. The air between them was heavy with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared burden pressing down on them both. Taurus broke the silence first, her voice low and measured. "I still find it hard to believe that Malachi would go this far," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. "We always had our differences, but I never thought he would betray our family, our people, like this." Terry glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Power does strange things to people," he replied. "And fear even more so. Malachi is afraid of what the alliance means for the Vortan Empire, for the old ways he's so desperate to preserve. He sees humanity as a threat, and in his mind, this is the only way to protect what he values." Taurus shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "What he values?" she echoed softly. "But what about what I value? What about the future we've been trying to build, the peace we've worked so hard to achieve? Does that mean nothing to him?" Terry didn't have an answer for her. He knew that for some, the idea of change, especially change as profound as the integration of two vastly different species, was too terrifying to accept. Malachi was clinging to a vision of the past, a vision that was incompatible with the new world that Terry and Taurus were striving to create. But knowing that didn't make the betrayal any easier to bear. As the hours ticked by, a plan began to take shape. The key to stopping Malachi lay in exposing his treachery to the Vortan High Council and the Emperor himself. But simply presenting the evidence they had gathered would not be enough. Malachi was a skilled manipulator, and he would likely have contingency plans in place to discredit any accusations leveled against him. They needed more than just proof of his guilt. They needed leverage, something that would force his hand and leave him no choice but to capitulate. Terry's mind raced as he considered their options. They needed to reach Vortan Prime, to confront Malachi on his own turf. But doing so would be incredibly dangerous. Malachi's agents were everywhere, and any attempt to travel to the capital would almost certainly be met with resistance. They needed a way to get in undetected, to move through the heart of enemy territory without being seen. That's when Terry remembered the prototype stealth ship that had been developed by human engineers in collaboration with Vortan scientists. It was a state-of-the-art vessel, equipped with the latest in cloaking technology and advanced sensors that could detect and avoid enemy patrols. The ship was still in the testing phase, but it was their best chance of slipping past Malachi's defenses and reaching the capital unnoticed. Taurus agreed to the plan, her resolve hardening as she prepared herself for the mission ahead. She knew the risks, understood that this could very well be a one-way trip, but she was determined to see it through. Malachi's betrayal had cut deep, but it had also ignited a fire within her, a fierce determination to protect her people, to ensure that the future she had envisioned for the Vortan Empire did not crumble into ashes. They made their preparations in secret, enlisting the help of a trusted few who were willing to risk everything for the cause. Admiral Zerker provided them with the necessary clearance codes and secured the prototype stealth ship, which had been stowed away in a hidden hangar on the outskirts of the outpost. The plan was simple. They would depart under the cover of night, using the ship's cloaking abilities to evade detection as they made their way to Vortan Prime. Once there, they would infiltrate the capital, gather the evidence needed to expose Malachi, and present their findings to the Emperor. The night of their departure was tense, the air thick with anticipation and dread. As the ship powered up, its sleek form disappearing from sight as the cloaking technology engaged, Terry and Taurus shared a final, silent look. There was no need for words. They both understood what was at stake, both knew the dangers they were about to face. This mission would test them in ways they had never been tested before, and there was no guarantee they would survive. But they were ready. Together they would see this through, or they would die trying. As the ship lifted off, slipping silently into the void, Terry felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty, all of it faded away, leaving only the clarity of purpose. This was what he had trained for, what he had dedicated his life to. Protecting the Alliance, safeguarding the future of humanity and the Vortan Empire. That was all that mattered now. For Taurus, the journey ahead was a crucible, a trial by fire that would either forge her into the leader she was meant to be or destroy her completely. But she was ready to face it, to confront the darkness that had taken root within her own family and reclaim the future she had fought so hard to protect. The path ahead was uncertain, the outcome far from assured, but as the stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of unknown possibilities, both Terry and Taurus knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and in that, they found the strength to keep moving forward. The journey to Vortan Prime would be long and perilous, filled with dangers both seen and unseen. But it was a journey they had to take, for the sake of their people, for the sake of the Alliance, and for the sake of the future they both believed in. And as the ship glided silently through the darkness, its destination set, they steeled themselves for the challenges that lay ahead, ready to face whatever came their way. The descent into Vortan Prime. The stealth ship glided through the depths of space, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the naked eye and to the vast array of sensors that dotted the expanse surrounding Vortan Prime. Inside the ship, the tension was palpable, a heavy, almost suffocating presence that settled over Terry and Taurus as they approached the heart of the Vortan Empire. The silence was only broken by the quiet hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep of the control panels as Terry deftly navigated the vessel through the intricate web of defense grids that protected the capital planet. Terry's focus was razor-sharp, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the ship through the treacherous corridors of space. Every movement had to be precise, every decision calculated to the smallest detail. One mistake, one wrong turn, and they would be detected, their mission over before it even began. The weight of responsibility bore down on him, but he had long since learned to compartmentalize, to push the fear and doubt to the back of his mind and focus solely on the task at hand. Taurus, seated beside him, was a study in controlled intensity. Her eyes were fixed on the view screen, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited them on the surface. The capital city of Vortan Prime was a sprawling metropolis, a labyrinth of towering spires and fortified bunkers, all under the watchful eyes of the Imperial Guard and Malachi's loyalists. It was a place where danger lurked around every corner, where a single misstep could mean death or worse. But it was also the seat of power, the place where the fate of the Vortan Empire and the fragile alliance with humanity would be decided. As they neared the planet's atmosphere, Terry activated the ship's secondary cloaking systems, designed to mask their descent from the high-powered scanners that swept the skies. The ship shuddered slightly as it pierced the upper layers of the atmosphere, the turbulence a reminder of the physical forces at play as they made their way towards the surface. The capital city loomed below them, a vast expanse of steel and stone, its lights glittering like a sea of stars against the darkened landscape. "We're almost there," Terry said, his voice low but steady. Once we breach the lower atmosphere, I'll take us down to the outskirts of the city. We'll land in one of the old industrial sectors away from the main thoroughfares. It should give us the cover we need to make our way into the city undetected." Taurus nodded, her expression resolute. "We have to be quick," she replied, her voice carrying the same steely determination that had driven her throughout this ordeal. "Malachi's forces will be on high alert, especially now that we're so close. We can't afford any delays." The ship descended smoothly, its cloaking systems holding steady as they passed through the clouds and into the lower atmosphere. The city's skyline rose up to meet them, a forest of skyscrapers and defensive towers, each one bristling with weapons and sensors. Terry guided the ship towards the industrial sector, a sprawling area of abandoned factories and warehouses that had once been the lifeblood of the city's manufacturing economy. Now, it was a shadow of its former self, a place where the remnants of the past clung to life in the midst of decay. They touched down in the heart of the sector, the ship's landing struts sinking into the cracked and weathered pavement. Terry powered down the engines, the ship settling into a low, idle hum as it blended seamlessly with the surrounding structures. Outside, the city was eerily quiet, the sounds of activity muffled by the thick walls of the factories and the distance from the more populated areas. Terry and Taurus disembarked quickly, their senses on high alert as they stepped out into the dimly lit streets. The air was thick with the smell of rust and oil, a testament to the years of neglect that had left this part of the city in ruins. They moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows as they navigated the narrow alleyways and deserted thoroughfares, their eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Their destination was the central government complex, a massive fortress-like structure that dominated the city's skyline. It was here that the Emperor held court, where the Vortan High Council convened, and where Malachi had likely consolidated his power. If they were to succeed in exposing his treachery, they would need to infiltrate the complex, gain access to the council chambers, and present their evidence before Malachi could react. As they approached the outer perimeter of the complex, the full scale of the challenge before them became apparent. The fortress was surrounded by multiple layers of security, each one more formidable than the last. High walls topped with electrified barriers, patrols of heavily armed guards, and automated defense systems designed to detect and neutralize any intruders. It was a fortress in every sense of the word, designed to keep out even the most determined of enemies. Terry studied the defenses, his mind working rapidly to formulate a plan. The most direct route was out of the question. They would need to find another way in, one that would allow them to bypass the outer defenses and reach the inner sanctum without raising the alarm. It was a daunting task, but not an impossible one. There were always weak points, vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those who knew where to look. Taurus, too, was assessing the situation, her eyes narrowing as she considered their options. She had grown up in this city, had walked these streets and studied the architecture of the complex from a young age. She knew its layout intimately, knew where the hidden entrances and escape routes were, the places where one could slip in and out unnoticed. But even with her knowledge, this would be no easy feat. Malachi would have anticipated her return, would have prepared for any attempt to infiltrate the complex. They would have to be smarter, faster, and more cunning than ever before. "We'll need to split up," Taurus said finally, her voice breaking the silence. "I'll go through the underground tunnels. They lead directly to the council chambers, but they're heavily monitored. I'll need to disable the security systems from the inside." Terry nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. "I'll create a distraction on the surface," he replied, "something to draw their attention away from the tunnels. Once you're inside, you can signal me and I'll make my way in." They exchanged a quick, determined glance before moving into action. Taurus led the way, guiding Terry to a service entrance that connected to the underground tunnels. The entrance was hidden behind a heavy metal door, its surface rusted and worn from years of disuse. With a swift motion, Taurus pried the door open, revealing a narrow passageway that descended into the darkness below. Terry hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on Taurus's face as she prepared to step into the tunnel. "Be careful," he said quietly, his voice laced with concern. "We don't know what Malachi has waiting for us down there." Taurus met his gaze, her expression unyielding. I will, she promised. And you do the same. We're in this together, Terry. We've come too far to lose each other now. With those words, she disappeared into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing her form as she made her way towards the heart of the complex. Terry watched her go, a sense of unease settling in his gut. He had come to care deeply for Taurus, far more than he had ever expected when this mission began. The thought of losing her, of failing in their mission, was almost too much to bear. But he pushed those thoughts aside, steeling himself for what was to come. Terry moved quickly through the deserted streets, his mind focused on creating the distraction that would give Taurus the time she needed to disable the security systems. He located an old power station on the outskirts of the sector, its crumbling structure still connected to the city's electrical grid. With a few precise adjustments to the control panels, he rigged the station to overload, setting a timer that would trigger a massive surge of energy throughout the grid. The explosion, when it came, was deafening, a burst of light and sound that shattered the stillness of the night and sent a shockwave rippling through the city. Alarms blared as the power grid failed, plunging entire sections of the city into darkness. Terry could hear the shouts of the guards as they scrambled to respond to the sudden chaos, their attention drawn away from the complex and towards the source of the disturbance.